G'day folks, Damon from Nomad. There's a lot of different jigs out there for a lot of different applications. I want to talk you through the metal jigs that are in the Nomad range and what each jig is primarily used for and the situations where you're going to use it. So we're going to show you all the different jigs and the different techniques and how to work each of the jigs. So if you're looking at your slow pitch jigging and want to target more of your demersal reef species closer to the bottom, you need to look at the buffalo, the gypsy, and the ridgeback. If you're looking at more of your faster jigging styles and you want to target fish that are sitting mid-water or you want to cover more ground, you want to be looking at the streaker and the ridgeback. So the buffalo is a center balanced jig. As you can see, it's got more weight distribution in the middle here and a flat side. So this is your classic slow pitch jig. The idea with these guys is you're fishing deeper water for your demersal reef species. So anything that's hanging near the bottom, you know, groupers, snappers, that type of stuff. This is a get down to the bottom and then give the rod a little flick. This is designed to kind of come up and then it'll flutter back down. So the fish should see this getting worked in a fairly small zone off the bottom, and you're giving it a flick, let it flutter back down. The fish will often hit this one on the fall. The gypsy is a classic teardrop shaped jig. It's got a little bit of a different shape on the backside from the front. Now again, that gives it some flutter when it falls, but this one will sink at a reasonably fast rate. So you can use this in deeper water if you need to get down. This one will sink at a reasonable speed. The idea is you can work this near the bottom, demersal species, and you can give it that kind of rip and it'll flutter. So this is the sort of thing where you could give it a couple of jigs and then let it flutter back down. And because of the larger side, the flat side, it will kind of get that flutter and then it'll start to sink again. So again, this is something that gets hit a lot either on the fall or just as you start to wind it again and the fish have eaten it just at the end of the fall. So the Ridgeback is a jig we've developed as a hybrid between slow pitch jigs and faster jigs. The cool thing with this is you can work it fast. So this angle at the front here actually catches water when you rip it up. It gives it a bit of a swimming action when it goes up. But the body shape and the sort of contours on the side, you can also work it as a slow pitch jig. So you can let it get down near the bottom, demersal reef species, and you can give it a big flick with the rod. It'll actually dart up, go out to the side, and then it'll kind of flutter, it'll slide, and then it'll flutter a little bit. So the body will actually start going a little bit like that because of the extra weight at the bottom and because of this flat area. So it's a very, very versatile jig that you can use for slow pitch or faster styles of jigging. The Streaker is your classic faster jig. So the idea with this one is it sinks really quickly. So if you need to get down quickly to where the fish are and then work this fast, the Streaker is the type of jig that you need. So it's got a flat side on one side and a curved side on the other. So it does get quite a bit of swimming action. When you rip it, it will get that little sort of swimming, vibrating action. It can get a little bit of flutter. It's more of like a slide action on the fall. So it's not gonna kind of flutter as much as your slow pitch jig. It'll kind of slide out and then you give it a fast rip and it kind of swims up. So very, very effective for when fish are hanging sort of mid-water and you need to get down there quick and really cover some territory. So I've got the Ridgeback on here. It's a combination between a slow pitch and a faster jig. So I've got it right down near the bottom at the moment and I'm going to give it that big long sweep of the rod. So it'll be coming up and then it'll just kind of flutter back down. So the jig will slide out to the side, then it'll flutter a bit, then it'll slide, does a real combination of action. So that kind of big long jig and then just let it go back down. So I'm working this near the bottom at the moment. You want to let it go back down. I'm probably only going to work this 10, 15 feet off the bottom, 3 to 5 meters. That's what it's showing me. So get back down on the bottom. Just that big, long, slow lift. You can also, with the Ridgeback, give it a couple of those and then just let it sit there. A lot of the time, doesn't matter what jig you're using, that kind of faster, twitchy retrieve, and then just let it sit there for a second. Sometimes the fish will come and eat it. But that's the main ways that I would use a Ridgeback for slow pitch jigging. The other cool thing with the Ridgeback you can do is obviously use it as a high-speed jig for fishing the mid-water column. So that's really just kind of giving it that, you know, faster jigging technique. So with the buffalo jig, I've got it right on the bottom. I've just touched down on the bottom. You want to give it really long, slow little jigs like that. So you can either use a slow lift of the rod, or you can do a little flick like that. But you want to make sure that you don't have slack line going back down. So when you give it that little flick, you want to keep the rod in contact with it as it goes back down. That little bit of slack line that you see when you give it that flick, that's the jig actually sort of like fluttering, being really erratic. That's generally when the fish will hit it. So you want to make sure you're still in contact and not letting that big belly of line get in there. So you give it a little flick and then just kind of slowly drop it back down, and the jig will be fluttering as you do it. So with a buffalo, I'd normally work it up off the bottom like that. You can catch fish with the buffalo, even though it's a metal jig, with it just sitting still. Once you give it that little lift, I can feel it kind of bouncing there, moving as I pull it through the water, and then the fish will come up and hit it just as you've let it sit. So I've often had times where I'll let a jig sit there for, could be 10, 20 seconds, and a fish will come and whack it. And it's particularly effective if you do that long lift, let it sink, you feel something hit it, just let it sit there and wait. That's typically how I'd fish a buffalo, and I'd be targeting the lower water column. I know there are guys that use them, have used them in previous years for tuna fishing mid-water column, but again, you're targeting fish, you know what depth they're sitting at, you're using a metered braid to get down to that depth, and you're targeting the fish in a fairly small zone. All right, so I've got the gypsy jig down near the bottom at the moment. The gypsy's a lot like the buffalo jig. You want to fish it with a slow lift of the rod. You can give it a little bit more speed than you would give a buffalo jig, and you'll get a bit more action out of it when you lift it, and then it'll kind of slide and then start fluttering. That flat side will catch the water, just starts kind of fluttering down. So you can give it that little bit faster lift. And you can see there's not as much slack in the line with a gypsy as you'll get with a buffalo. You can kind of do that, keep in contact with the line as you drop it, and just let it sit there for a second. But you can also do this consistent, just nice, slow jig and let it rise and fall, and you're basically letting the jig do the work. All right, so I've got a Streaker Jig on here. This is your faster retrieve jig. This is the type of technique that you want to be using, much more active style of fishing. You want to jig it up. Ideally, you're looking at where the fish are sitting on the sounder. You want to jig it fast through that zone, and then ideally stop it just above that zone. You will get hits on the streaker even when it's stopped. So it's probably long enough now, there's not going to be anything happening there. Idea is drop it back down again. So if you want to cover a lot of distance and you can see that there's a big column of fish, you know, they're typically more pelagic style fish, or fish that are hanging higher in the water column, and a big stack of them, you want to jig it through the fish, try and get them excited. So I'll let that get back down on the bottom there. All right, and then yeah, it's this faster style of jigging. You can go, you know, really fast like that, or you can work a streaker like that as well, quite successfully. You don't need to go crazy fast, but you do want to vary your retrieve and your speed to just try and see what the fish are going to hit on the day. So the type of braid that you use when you're jigging really makes a big difference. This Ammonite braid, we've designed it specifically for jigging. It's super thin and it's super strong. It's got 36 weaves per inch, which means it's a tighter braid, and it just means it's thinner for the same strength. Now what that means is you're not going to have the line blow out in the current. You're going to get down there quicker, you're going to stay in the strike zone longer, and each time you work the jig up, when it drops back down, you're going to get a couple more drops in the zone just because that line's not blowing out in the current. So having the right braid really will catch you more fish when you're jigging. The type of rod that you use when you're jigging, whether it's slow pitch jigging or fast jigging, also makes a big difference. I really prefer a rod that's got a little bit more stiffness in the tip of the rod, because that is imparting the action to the jig. I don't like a rod that's really soft. It's finding that balance so that when you lift the jig, the rod's actually flicking the jig up and imparting that action into the jig for you. I don't particularly like a rod that's really, really soft, because that kind of, I guess it kills a lot of the action in the jig. I like to be more in control of the jig myself so that I can control how fast the rod's moving, and know that when I give it a little flick, the tip of the rod's gonna snap up and basically impart that action to the jig.